The autumn wind carried whispers through the cobblestone streets of Blackwood Hollow, and with it came Alara, a woman of breathtaking beauty and an ego as vast as the storm-darkened sky. She moved with the entitled grace of a queen, her velvet cloak whispering against the damp stones, her eyes fixed on the lone, ivy-choked cottage at the end of Thorn Lane. This was the home of Alistair's wife Morwenna, the dull, simple woman he'd promised to leave, a promise that had grown stale over 2 long years. Today, Alara decided, she would no longer be a secret kept in rented rooms. She would plant her flag in the very heart of his domestic life, to see the cowardice in her lover's eyes and the defeat in his wife's. She rapped sharply on the heavy oak door, a sound like a knell in the quiet afternoon. The door swung open, not with a hesitant creak, but with a silent, yielding sweep, revealing Morwenna. She was not the faded, frumpy creature Alara had painted in her mind. She was tall, with hair the color of old smoke, and eyes of a calm, unearthly gray that held the stillness of deep water. A simple smock, dusted with what looked like flour, covered her frame, and she smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips that held neither surprise nor anger. "I've been expecting a chill in the air," Morwenna said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "Do come in and warm yourself by the fire." Disarmed and irked by this serene welcome, Alara swept past her, her nose wrinkling at the scent of drying herbs, beeswax, and something beneath it all, a metallic tang like ozone after lightning. The main room was a tapestry of organized peculiarity. Bundles of strange plants hung from the rafters. Jars of colored powders lined rough shelves, and in the large hearth, a fire burned with flames that, for just a heartbeat, seemed to flicker green. Alara announced her presence and her claim with theatrical cruelty, detailing her stolen nights with Alistair, the promises he'd whispered, the future he'd painted for them. She paced before the fire, her shadow dancing on the walls in a grotesque, elongated pantomime. Morwenna merely listened, her hands busy grinding something with a mortar and pestle, a rhythmic, grinding sound that began to synchronize unnervingly with Alara's pounding heart. As Alara's tirade reached its peak, she snatched a delicate porcelain figurine from the mantel, a songbird, and declared, "He says your touch is cold, like this china. My touch brings him to life." She let the figurine drop. It did not shatter on the stone floor. Instead, Morwenna flicked a single grain of powder from her mortar, and the falling bird froze midair, an inch from destruction, then gently floated back to its place. The grinding stopped. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste, thick with magic and impending wrath. Alara's arrogance curdled into a cold, primal fear that seized her throat. Before she could scream or flee, Morwenna breathed a single guttural word. The door slammed shut with a finality that shook the walls, and the iron latch melted and reformed into a knotted seal. The fire in the hearth roared up, not with heat, but with a chilling, spectral light that cast no warmth, illuminating the room in stark, bone-white detail. "You speak of life, little thief," Morwenna intoned, her voice now layered with echoes, as if many spoke through her. "Let us see what life you truly understand." She blew a cloud of fine, iridescent dust from her palm. It swirled around Alara, and where it touched her skin, a terrifying numbness bloomed, followed by a creeping, crawling sensation. Looking down in horror, Alara saw the skin of her hands beginning to granulate, turning a rough, woody brown. She tried to run, but her feet were anchoring themselves to the floorboards, toes fusing and rooting into the wood, drawing sustenance from the very house she sought to conquer. Vines, thorny and eager, erupted from the seams of her fine dress, weaving around her limbs, pulling her into a rigid stance. She was becoming a grotesque, human-shaped tree in the center of the room. Her screams became the rustle of dry leaves, her tears sap weeping from naughty eyes. Morwenna circled her frozen form, her fury a quiet, terrible force. You sought to take a hearth, she whispered, each word a spell. Now you will guard one. With a slicing motion of her hand, Morwenna carved symbols into the air that glowed like embers before sinking into Alara's wooden torso. The spell was one of eternal vigilance. Alara's consciousness remained, trapped and aware, her roots feeling every footstep in the house, her branches sensing every shift in the wind, her wooden ears hearing every conversation for centuries to come. A permanent, silent witness to a home she could never disrupt, bound to protect the sanctity she had tried to break. As the last of the human softness vanished into bark, Morwenna turned back to her hearth. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the now normal fire and the faint, perpetual rustle of leaves from the new, sorrowful tree that stood where a proud, arrogant woman once had, a permanent fixture and testament to the wife's ancient, formidable power. The decades that followed were a symphony of exquisite torment for the consciousness now known only as the Thorn Witness. Alara's awareness did not dim. Instead, it sharpened, stretched thin across the centuries like sap hardened into amber. She felt the cottage's deep, slow pulse through her roots, the grind of the millstone on the hill, the thrum of the underground river, the footfalls of every creature that crossed the threshold. She saw, through the knotholes that were her eyes, the unending tapestry of life within the walls she was cursed to guard. She witnessed Alistair's return that very first evening, his face pale with the husband's guilty fatigue, and watched as he paused, confused, to run a hand over her now rough bark, sensing a familiarity he could not name, before Morwenna welcomed him with a kiss that smelled of rosemary and secrets. She observed their life, not as a dull tragedy, but as a quiet, profound partnership, built on shared cups of tea and murmured words in a language older than the stones, a language Alara now understood was the tongue of covenants and deep earth magic. She felt their joy, their sorrows, the stillborn child they mourned by planting moonflowers in a corner of the garden, their roots tangling with Alara's in a cold embrace, the joyous adoption of a foundling witch girl with stormy eyes, whose laughter was like bell chimes, and whose first spell made the Thorn Witness's leaves tremble with a forgotten, phantom sensation of warmth. Centuries folded into one another. Alistair and Morwenna passed, their essences not vanishing, but seeping into the very mortar and timber of the house, becoming part of its protective spirit. Generations of witches and wise folk inherited the cottage, each feeling the presence of the Thorn Witness, some leaving it offerings of rainwater and whispered thanks, others respectfully pruning a branch for a potent staff or a healing charm, each snip a flash of sharp, ghostly pain for Alara. She heard wars rage in the world beyond the hollow, heard the screams and the cannons, but the cottage stood untouched, a bastion of quiet power, and she, its eternal sentinel. She learned the true weight of home, not as a possession to be won, but as a living entity built from love, protection, and sacrifice, a truth that became her prison's bars. Her initial fury had long ago burned to cold, hard ash, replaced by a regret so vast and deep it felt geological. She was a lesson fossilized, a warning in wood and leaf, and her only purpose was to guard the peace of the hearth she had once sought to claim. The ultimate humiliation, the final twist of the witch's justice, was that over the slow march of time, Alara's trapped spirit began to care. She felt a fierce, involuntary pang when a blight threatened the garden, and she directed all her will into pushing a hidden root to strangle the diseased plant. She shuddered her branches in a gale to shield a window from breaking. The arrogant side chick had become, through an eternity of enforced observation, the devoted, silent wife of the house, bound by a love she never chose but was now her entire reality. Her rustling leaves, which once echoed with screams, now formed a constant sighing lullaby for every child who slept safe within the walls, a perpetual penance woven into the very sound of sanctuary. The wind, as it always did, whispered through her leaves, carrying away the last of her human name and leaving only the truth in its rustle, that the greatest magic was not in the taking, but in the keeping, and that some fires, once crossed, forever change the one who dares to burn. Thank you for watching African Tales Point, where every story carries a message. Remember, every story has a reason, and every lesson has a voice. Until next time, keep listening, because the next African tale may change everything.